All right, okay, I get it. It looks like I might have been wrong. Maybe. So if you have been following this channel for a decent amount of time, it should come as no surprise that I am not a fan of Aikido. I think it's one of the least practical martial arts based on the techniques and how it's trained. I made a video a while back ranking different martial arts, and I put Aikido in the mostly trash section. Not saying you can't make any of it work, but that it's predominantly kind of garbage. But it looks like someone's come out there and started to really find ways to make Aikido work. Now, if you've been following the martial art YouTube space, you've probably heard of Martial Arts Journey and the YouTuber named Rokkas. Okay, he's been on YouTube for quite a while. He started off as an Aikido instructor. I believe he was a 3rd degree. He loved Aikido, but one day, after being threatened in real life, he recognized he didn't really feel comfortable in his martial arts and recognized that Aikido really wasn't working for him. Now, he was an Aikido instructor. He had a school. So he didn't want to just like give up, right? So first Rokkas went and he tried to make it more practical. And it just wasn't working. So he ended up going out and getting into combat sports and other martial arts and actually trying to become a real well-rounded martial artist. And he's become quite good. I believe he's had an MMA fight now, actually. Now, Rokkas has spent a lot of his time on YouTube bashing Aikido, talking about how it's garbage and how it doesn't work. And I've agreed with him pretty much all the way through. But now he comes out with this video about Steven Seagal's Aikido.
We've seen Steven Seagal perform various Aikido moves in movies and demonstrations, and we've even seen him fighting on a chair, but we've never seen Steven Seagal moves used in a real fight or even in sparring. After practicing Aikido for more than a decade and then trying to make it functional by blending it with combat sports, I figured it's time for me to test if Steven Seagal moves can actually work against someone who's fighting back.
Now, this is interesting because I have heard that Steven Seagal's Aikido is the most practical version of Aikido. I've talked online about how I don't like Aikido before, both on YouTube, but also on Facebook. And I've talked to some people with differences in opinion, and almost all of them send me to either Steven Seagal or this one other guy on YouTube. His name's is escaping me right now, but he does like some kind of practical Aikido stuff on YouTube. If you know who he is, put him in the link below. I'll check out his videos. But mostly these, like Steven Seagal is one of those places where the Aikido guys say, no, this kind of Aikido works. And I've been very, very skeptical about it this whole time. But Rokkas apparently thinks he might be able to make some of it work. And now he is, I believe, a blue belt, maybe even a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So if anyone can do it, it would be somebody with Jiu-Jitsu ability. I have said that. If anyone can make Aikido work, it's someone with Jiu-Jitsu ability.
But first, I needed to figure out which of his techniques had the greatest potential of working. So I watched dozens of the best fight scenes and demonstrations from Steven Seagal and finally came up with 4 most promising techniques that I will try to perform against someone who's fighting back. The first technique was the kodogeshi, translated as the wrist turn, an Aikido technique that literally twists the wrist in a way that continues to lock the elbow and then the shoulder of the attacker and forces the person to fall to the ground as a result. The second technique is known as riminage, or entering throw. But while most Aikido schools use circular movements to perform this technique, Steven Seagal is famously known for directly entering and hitting the other person with a straight arm, a much more brutal but potentially more effective version of the same technique. The third technique is known as Sankyo, or the third principle, one out of 6 so-called principal Aikido techniques, where in this one, the wrist is turned towards the person and upwards, locking the elbow and then either moving the person around, or as in this case done by Steven Seagal, using the wrist to direct the person to a desired location. The fourth and final technique I chose is known as yubidori, or finger grab, a move where one or more fingers of the attackers are grabbed and manipulated to either have them submit or also to direct their movement to a desired location.
So that's interesting. He's not saying he can make all of it work, but he's picking out 4 specific moves to try and make work. And I think that's smart when you're trying to pressure test a system that is not, very well pressure tested. You want to look at the things that are most practical first, make them work, and then if you can, if those work, maybe try and build on it from there. But I like the way he's going about it.
Now, you may be thinking that my chances of pulling off these techniques against a person who's fighting back are low, especially since these days many people equate Steven Seagal to a fake martial arts master. But the truth is that putting all of Steven Seagal's controversies aside, his Aikido lineage is real. In his early 20s, Steven moved to Japan where he intensively studied Aikido for years. He was even one of the first Westerners to run a dojo in the country of the rising sun. And even though some people speculate that his high position was related to the fact that he got married to the dojo owner's daughter, his Aikido skills were undeniable, as he was also one of the very few Westerners to hold the 7th black belt degree in Aikido, a degree that only until a few years ago was the highest degree in Aikido rewarded to Westerners ever. Steven is also known for having developed his own unique Aikido style, known as Tenshin Aikido, which unlike many traditional Aikido styles that are soft and circular, Steven's style tends to be more direct and sharp, and potentially at least to some degree more effective than traditional Aikido. As such personalities as Lenny Sly, a YouTube content creator and instructor of Steven Seagal's Tenshin style, has been recording of telling stories of using Tenshin Aikido in real fights when he was working as a bouncer.
So Lenny Sly is the person I was talking about when I said there was another YouTube guy doing practical Aikido moves. I've seen some of his stuff. He does seem to be doing some things that are somewhat legit. I didn't know that it was Steven Seagal's style, which is crazy because I do respect what Lenny Sly is trying to do. So to hear that that is Steven Seagal's version of Aikido is, that's encouraging. That's encouraging. We'll see what happens.
Still though, as far as recorded footage goes of Steven Seagal using Aikido in a fight, or even sparring, there are no such examples whatsoever. The only form of pressure testing, aka trying to apply your techniques against someone who is fighting back, that we see with Steven Seagal doing is when he's performing the so-called randori, translated as controlling chaos, an Aikido exercise where up to 4 attackers go after you at the same time. The issue here though is that the attackers are not free to attack in any way they want. Instead, they are allowed to attack only in predefined ways, such as grabbing, striking with a cutting motion from above or sideways, or throwing a straight punch and then traditionally leaving the arm hanging forward. While the highest level of pressure testing that I've seen Steven Seagal use was in a more intense version of the randori that he asked his students to do during their black belt tests. During the test, Steven would have the testee sit in front of 3 attackers and spontaneously give a command for the attackers to go after the testee and to try to stop and pin them using all their strength. Unlike in traditional Aikido randori, in this test, it seems that the attackers do not hold back as much and do not fall as easily, leading to a very different result in how much the student is able to achieve regarding their Aikido techniques. Here, many of the Aikido techniques that you normally see do not appear anymore, and while in some tests you do see a throw or two, in most cases, soon enough the attackers successfully pin the person down and hold them on the ground or by the wall. In my opinion though, this is a good and valuable practice, since it not only gives you a sense of the difficulty and reality of grappling against multiple opponents, it also potentially develops character and perseverance, as you're forced to fight back with everything you have while you're pinned down and while you're doing your best to not give up.
I do like here, Steven Seagal has a full-powered randori. I can appreciate that. That's giving a more realistic version of pressure testing.
Unfortunately though, while there's footage of Steven's students going through his test, there's no footage of him doing the test himself, in order to show how effective he would be under the same condition. Instead, whenever Steven Seagal does randori, it is the lighter version, where his students are falling for him much more easily, and where they don't use all of their strength to try to bring him down. And before you say, oh, that is because Steven Seagal's techniques are too dangerous, well, technically the same logic should apply to his students as well. Yet for some reason, they are given the opportunity to do this test nevertheless. So having little footage to work with in seeing if Steven Seagal's Aikido techniques work in sparring, it was time for me to find out myself. My testing area was going to be a BJJ gym that I was kindly given permission to film at, but from experience I already knew that trying out new techniques against experienced people isn't the best way to go. I already made the mistake of pretty much every single time in the past when I did try to make my Aikido work, where I went against black belts and masters of their art. I mean, I wouldn't be able to even apply techniques that definitely work against them, since they're so good. So this time, I decided to go against BJJ white belts, against whom traditional Aikido techniques would still not work, and who are people who already know enough about grappling so they would be good enough to shut down techniques that were not perfect yet, but had potential to be effective.
This is a really smart strategy. I know this is something that a lot of martial artists trying to show the efficacy of their martial art. This is something that can cause problems. I know I've tried to show how certain karate techniques are very practical and useful, and then like I have a guy who's like a Muay Thai world champion. It's like, do it to me. And it's like, dude, if I have trouble doing Muay Thai on you, and I'm working a technique that I've only been drilling for 3 months, obviously I'm going to have trouble landing that on somebody who's as skilled as you. If you want to practice a new technique, you need to start at a low level until you get good enough to do it on, the black belts of the style. So I like how he's starting off with the white belts, getting it down, and who knows, maybe if this works, maybe in a few years he'll be able to land it on the black belts as well.
Naturally, the first white belt that I went with was my wife, who by the way recently got her first stripe, and I'm super proud of her. But then before you tell me, hey, she's tiny compared to you, and even though Aikido famously says weight and strength doesn't matter, let me tell you, it does. AKA, there's a good reason why all combat sports have weight classes. Yet then Steven Seagal is a big person too, and in pretty much all of his demonstrations, his attackers were significantly smaller than him. So before I went against bigger guys, I thought that this was a fair enough first go, doing which I managed to perform 3 out of 4 Steven Seagal techniques I was planning to use.
Now this man's just beating up his wife. Look at this. Look at this. All right, no, he got 3 out of 4 techniques. So that's actually very, very impressive. I know it was, for one, the fact that it is his wife. We don't know how their dynamic is, so that may have shifted it one way or the other. And she is also, like I said, she is smaller than him. But the fact that he pulled off 3 out of 4 means that there is efficacy there in the technique. So I am impressed already.
But alright, let's make things more exciting and bring in the bigger guys, where the story initially was quite different. My next opponent, although as planned a white belt, was much closer to my weight category, and it showed. When I tried to apply technique number 1, Korageshi, he simply pulled his arm out, and then he went to the ground, where pretty much all of my Aikido techniques that I wanted to achieve were not gonna happen. As far as going to the ground goes, I get him. That's what I used to do when I was a white belt too. Since in most BJJ schools, it takes a while until you learn what to do while standing, as initially you are mostly taught only ground techniques. But since I needed to keep the game standing, I passed his guard and submitted him quickly in order for us to stand up again. I then went for the second technique, Iriminage, but he stepped back and kept me away with his arms. And then as soon as I was about to do the wrist takedown, he went to the ground again. I then submitted him again, but another challenge became apparent. Since my partner was mostly defensive, another common trait for BJJ beginners, I found few opportunities to try to perform Steven Seagal's Aikido techniques. As it turns out, I would have benefited from my partner trying to attack me, as then opportunities would appear. This also reminded me of the time when I first tried Judo, as somewhat of a distant relative of Aikido, where during the sparring, I was super defensive myself, since I didn't know what to do, and then I was surprised by the end why I got taken down so few times, until a Judo expert explained to me that if you're being only defensive, that will prevent other people from performing many of their techniques, but that would also not get you very far either.
It is also interesting because Aikido is supposed to be a fully defensive art form, so the fact that their techniques only work when the person's coming at you, while strategically I think that's a huge gap, it actually makes perfect sense within the context of the style. So that's interesting. Again, another thing I hadn't really thought about.
For a moment, I was concerned, thinking, what if I won't be able to pull off even a single Steven Seagal's technique, even after so much effort of trying to make Aikido effective in combat sports?
The gi is getting in the way. Whenever there's a strong grab, it locks off some of the techniques I want to do. And also whenever somebody goes to the ground, my Aikido is gone. But its hope is still not lost yet.
Yet my next partner was a 2-stripe white belt, something that changed the course of the story. Although later, I learned that he used to do Aikido too, and he knew that I was the Aikido guy from YouTube, which didn't make things easy as he saw some of my techniques coming. Nevertheless, after some moments of sparring, I managed to catch his wrist and finally successfully pulled out the first Steven Seagal technique, Korageshi.
Alright, so he got his first technique off. Kind of funny that it was on an ex-Aikido guy, but he was able to get it off, and the guy did look a lot more aggressive, and he was reaching out for that guy's hand, which is, again, if Aikido is going to work, it's going to be when someone's actually reaching out to grab your hand, because you're not catching the hand mid-air like you see in some Aikido demonstrations. So, good showing there. Yeah, good showing.
By the way, if you're wondering why my partner didn't jump over himself and didn't do any flips like in Aikido demonstrations, that is because most people's natural reaction from a wrist takedown will be a simple backward fall. Meanwhile, all the fancy flips, they're more meant for demonstrations to look cool and in order to get back on your feet quickly. But if the wrist locker will not want you to do any fancy flips, you won't be able to pull them off, as the flips essentially require cooperation. Now the question was if I will be able to perform the other Steven Seagal's techniques. Once I submitted my partner for us to get back on our feet, I then tried tried to perform the Sankyo technique, but he blocked it, which led me to giving him away my back. Not a great outcome. I was then forced to go to the ground again and to do a submission. Time was running out though, as there were only a couple more minutes left for me to try to pull off at least 2 more Aikido techniques out of 4, with the Yubidori technique not working entirely, as the fingers were simply too slippery from sweat, and I still couldn't find a way to enter with an Irimi Nage, mostly because my partner was leaning forward too much. But then a light bulb moment occurred to me. I was trying to do Aikido after all, and what is Aikido known for? Using your opponent's energy against him. As my partner was leaning forward too much and was pushing towards me, I decided to turn on my Aikido powers. I went with the energy of the push, gave him away, and pulled off another Aikido technique that I wasn't even expecting to pull off, known as Kokyunage, which Steven Seagal is also seen doing in his movies. And then by the end of the sparring, I managed to pull off an Irimi Nage too.
Yo, that last one was fire. Okay, that one was fire. He just landed 2 more, and that last one like really looked like Aikido out of a movie with the arm outstretched and everything. That was cool. I understand that every time when you do a technique in real life, it doesn't look as good as the demonstration. So I understand how like some of the other moves, they looked messy. You still ended up on the ground. But that last one, man, he looked smooth with it. That was nice. So what have we learned? We've learned that it's possible. This was a great video. It showed Aikido actually being able to work in pressure-tested situations. There are a couple things here that I find really important to note. It's that when he was doing the Aikido techniques, they were from positions where they were already holding and grabbing each other and grabbing for each other's wrists and leaning into each other. They were not situations where he was grabbing someone's fist out of midair. Because that's what you see a lot of Aikido guys practicing, is a fist coming out of midair and catching it and doing something crazy. He never did that. It was always from already having grips. And that is or has been one of my biggest issues with Aikido throughout history. So, do I think Aikido works? Still, the answer is still, in general, no. And let me explain why. Aikido techniques can work, obviously. He showed that. But the way they are trained in the majority of Aikido schools is so different than what Rokkas just did. They're doing like these catching punches in midair and throwing you, stuff that's crazy. Rokkas did nothing like that. He took the Aikido principles and moves and he used them, but he changed up so much about the training that it's still hard for me to put the efficacy on the martial art itself. I think the way Aikido trains is even more impractical than like karate's 3-step sparring, where you put one arm out and you hold it there and the guy does some moves around the arm. I think Aikido is even more impractical than that. And when it comes to the training methods. So I think Aikido has potential. I think if, say, Rokkas takes the next 5-10 years and really hones down on Aikido techniques, finds out which ones do work, which ones don't, how to make them work, creates new training methods, there's potential there that it is usable. But as of right now, I still put it very low on my list. But again, this is one of the best videos I've seen for the potential of Aikido to become something much more useful in real life. And for that, I salute you, Rokkas. That was good work. Again, guys, if you like this video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. More coming to you. Practical karate, reviews on other martial artists, all kind of martial art based videos right here. I'm doing all the stuff. So yeah, if this is the kind of content you like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you next time. Peace.